Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New South Wales Family Daycare Association webinar in the PD in Your Pocket series. And this is actually our last session for 2022. So it's a bit sad tonight that we're finishing off, but there'll be more sessions in 2023 that will be coming out to you. And we are expecting close to 900 people online tonight. So we're slowly climbing, but I am conscious of time, so we will get started very shortly. I'm Robyn Monro Miller, and I'll be your facilitator tonight. I'm actually joining you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and that is where the Family Daycare office is based. And I've been practicing recently because I've had a lot of people tell me about, how do you say hello in different languages? If you haven't already found out how to say hello in the Aboriginal language in your area, it might be great to sort of look that up. And I've learnt that on Gadigal land, I would say Bushiri Gamaru. And I hope I pronounced that correctly. I've been practicing, but as I say, I'm still learning. But it's always great to know how to say hello in the traditional language in the area that you live in. So if you haven't already learnt that, I'd love to challenge you to think about doing that. And if you do already know how to say hello in the traditional language of your area, please feel free to put it in the chat section. In the Q&A section that you see up the top, that's where I'll be asking you to put your questions tonight, so that we'll be able to have a question and answer session towards the end of this particular session. And I can see that we have got participants from right across the country, which is just wonderful to see. And and here we have Warami, which is from Darugland. Thank you so much, Sravita. And Salam Alaikum in Arabic. Thank you, Lika. And hello from Wangal land. Hello there too, Catherine. Mahaba to you too, Greta. So as we get going, I'll just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which the country we meet. And I know with so many different lands and so many traditional owners, New South Wales Family Daycare does present this webinar, as I mentioned before, from Gadigal country. And it's really important that we remember that Aboriginal children have been raised on this land by Aboriginal families for thousands of years. They're the oldest living civilization. And we acknowledge them tonight and acknowledge any Aboriginal elders past, present, who are or emerging, who are online with us. So let me get started. And I'm hoping that everybody has received the resource booklet that was sent to you this week. And if you didn't receive it, you can actually get the link right here. You can see here the New South Wales Family Daycare.org.au PD in your pocket. That is where you can actually find the specially prepared booklet. We've been getting a lot of inquiries also about certificates after each session. So I'd like to remind you all that the certificates generally go out about a week after the webinar. And unfortunately, we can't send certificates to people that just listen to the webinar as a podcast or watch it as a video. Only people who watch it live can get those certificates. And so if you are listening to this as a podcast, you will find that you can still, as I say, enjoy everything we're talking about, but there will be no certificate following. And if you don't receive your certificate within a week, you can actually email us at info@newsouthwalesfdc.org.au. But please note that I'm told that the reason that many people don't get their certificates is because they've either typed in an incorrect email address when they were registering, easy to happen, or because it's gone into your junk mail. So before you email Family Daycare, be great if you could check your junk mail box and also check that the email you registered with was correct. Now, unlike the last 4 episodes of PD in Your Pocket, this edition is actually not funded by the New South Wales Department of Education. So this session has been funded and provided for you by New South Wales Family Daycare Association. And that's because we believe in the importance of educators being able to access really high quality professional development. And so, as I mentioned before, this is the last session of PD in Your Pocket this year, but we do hope to continue PD in Your Pocket in 2023. And so we will be keeping you posted about that. So in preparing for this evening, New South Wales Family Daycare did do a little bit of a survey. And when we undertook that, we discovered a little bit about what we learned about you. And there were some questions when you registered for this session, and they are what we've put together to get the results. Because tonight we're talking about family engagement. And this particular slide is interesting because we asked you, how well do you feel you know the families of the children you care for? And if you have a look at this pie graph, you'll see that 49% of you think you know them really well, and 46% of you know them well. But only a small percentage of people are in that not at all or just a little bit. And so that's a really good sign. And there might be many reasons why you've actually put a little or not at all, and maybe they're just brand new children or you're new to family daycare. But the important thing is that the National Quality Standard requires that educators develop supportive relationships with families. And part of doing that is what we're going to be discussing tonight, because that's really important. The idea of supportive families, of supportive relationships with families, supports us to do the best we can in providing care and education for the children. Now, the next question we asked when you registered was about how well you think the families of the children you care for know you. So, and the percentages were a little bit different again. With 54% of you thought they knew you well, 38% of you, which is down on how well necessarily might know the families, 38% really well. And then once again, a small group with a little or not at all. And family engagement really is a two-way street. And that's why we asked that question, because you knowing the families is important, but it's equally important for the families to know you, because they are trusting you with their most precious asset. And families need to know who the person is that's caring for their child. It's one of the real strengths of family daycare that there is a very close relationship able to be formed. So the next question we asked was, do the families of the children you care for know your family? And 56% said yes, they know them well. 38% said they know a little bit about my family. And 6% said they don't know my family at all. And one of the great things about family daycare is that it is a more family-centred care. And as an educator, we have to remember that you're not there in isolation. You're not an island. You also have a family, which is important to you. And it's possible to share about your family. That's okay to share information about your family to your children and their families. And I'm wondering, when you're thinking about this, how much do you actually share, and what do they know? It'd be good for you to think about that as how that works for you. And remember, you do have to feel comfortable sharing. If there's things you don't wish to share, you don't have to. And if there are things about family privacy that you need to respect. But always remember that as family-centred care, it's quite okay to share information and to let people know about your family. This next question, and the last question we asked you, was how many different families have you provided care for since becoming a family daycare educator? Now have a look at that. Okay, so I was most impressed that the 25% of you, or over a quarter of you, provided care for over 40 families since becoming an educator. Now that is a lot of families whose lives you've touched. I always remember an old Chinese proverb that says, a child's life is like a piece of paper on which every passerby leaves a mark. And when we think of your role as a family daycare educator, we can see that the mark you would leave on families, you have become a very important part of children's lives and their parents' lives. And for that reason, it's important to acknowledge what a great role you are taking on and how important that role is in our community. So what are we going to cover tonight? Well, I think I'll just start by saying we are certainly going to cover family engagement, and that is working and interacting with our families. We're going to look at why is family engagement important, how we can actually engage collaboratively and respectfully, how we can support families to participate in our family daycare and in the family daycare service. That's an important one, with hopefully some practical suggestions, and how you can actually provide families with the information they need. And the final thing we're going to look at tonight is how we can recognise the key role families play in their children's wellbeing and development. And that's about recognising the really important role that families do play in children's development. So let's start by looking at what is family engagement. Now, family engagement is a two-way process. Okay, it's you interacting with the family and the family interacting with you. And this process means that you build genuine relationships with families, and relationships with families support that overall family well-being and children's healthy development. When families are engaged, when they feel comfortable with you, partnerships are created that have a common focus or a common vision, and that actually helps children to grow and thrive. So family engagement is critically important to the role you play in family daycare as an educator. When we think about family engagement, think about what you do to help create respectful, trusting, and equal partnerships between families and educators. Because when you do that, you are promoting children's care, learning, and development. When we look at that particular picture of the two people interacting, how many of you feel that that reminds you of your interactions with families? Perhaps you had an interaction today that was important. Never underestimate the importance of interactions, because as family daycare educators, a primary part of our care is about supporting families' engagement. And so taking the time to find out when is the best time to engage with families and how to do that should always be seen as part of your job and part of your role. Looking at this particular points about why it is important. And when you think of the why, those of you that read the booklet would be familiar with the words on this screen, because they actually come from the first page of the booklet. The main reason that family engagement is so important in family daycare is because families are children's first and most influential teachers, and because children learn more when families and educators work together to support their learning. And that's why the EYLF, which is the Early Years Learning Framework, and the My Time, Our Place framework, which is for children in the out of school hours sector in before and after care, stress the importance of this. And it's why it's actually required in the national quality standards. And families matter because they are the children's first educators. And when we work with them and they work with us, children learn more. I always remember when we had children, when parents first bring their children to us, there's a lot of nervousness around that. And so we can offer that reassuring comfort. There is a quote that I always like about when you have a child, it's forever to have a piece of your heart walking outside your body. And if you imagine that, there is a lot of emotion attached to your child being given, provided with care by someone else. So as a parent, we have a really important role in that reassurance, but also respecting parents as their first and most influential teachers that children will ever have. So we're going to look now at what the learning frameworks and the national quality standards say. So you can see that NQS is that national quality standards. And I'm just repeating this because I like to make sure if you are new to family daycare, we don't lose you with a whole lot of what we call acronyms, which is just letters put together so that as many of us know, but some of us may not. So the learning frameworks and the NQS say, let's have a look. Let's have a look at that first thing that they say. And this is from the Early Years Learning Framework, and which is often referred to as the ELF. And the ELF says that learning outcomes are most likely to be achieved when early childhood educators, that is yourselves, work in partnership with families. It says educators recognise that families are children's first and most influential teachers. So we didn't make this up. This is there in the Early Years Learning Framework. It's acknowledging the importance of family. And for those of you who have school-age children, My Time, Our Place uses similar words. They say things like from before birth, children are connected to family, community, culture, and place. Their earliest development and learning takes place through these relationships, particularly within families who are children's first and most influential educators. You'll also see that standard 6.1. Now that is the standard that is most relevant to tonight's presentation. Standard 6.1 of the NQS requires that educators develop the supportive relationships with families. Now, we're asked to use a range of questions to reflect on those particular relationships with our families. And some of the questions you might think about are, well, how do you help all families to feel comfortable, welcomed, and valued at the service? Think about what are you doing to ensure that every family knows that they are welcome at your service? What steps do you take? And think about those things. You might want to write them down, and you might want to reflect on that over the coming weeks as to what am I doing to make sure they feel comfortable? And how do you do that? How do you actually listen to families and include their perspectives in the educational program? What are you doing to make sure that you're asking families about their perspective, or you're listening to what they're saying? Perhaps you can tell by some of the feedback they give you. And what actually is the role of families in the service? How can we recognise their contributions? Do you have families that just rush in, give you the child and rush out? Do you have other families that like to come in and stay a while and sit and settle their child in, or and leave again? I mean, every family is different, and there's all different requirements that they have and challenges with just managing daily life. So the family that rushes in and drops their child off doesn't mean that they don't care about their child, but they are often, you know, pressed for time, or they need some other support systems to help them. And likewise, you know, the family who stays and sits may love being there, or they might be quite nervous. Okay, so having those conversations, watching for body language and watching for, you know, the different subtle cues that they might give you is really important. Because we also need to look at what is the contribution they can make. I mean, how do we recognize it? You know, what do we do when they bring in materials for us, or they offer different areas of support and help? How do we recognize that so that they feel valued in their interactions with you? The other question we like to ask at on this particular standard is, how do we share decision making with families? So what decisions can you make together with your families? And have you considered what they could be? And I'm wondering if anybody would like to put in the Q&A section, if you feel comfortable. You might like to type in some of these answers into the Q&A section for us to see. And the information, what information are you providing to families? And how does that information you provide contribute to the decisions you make in operating your service? So thinking about, you know, what sort of information are you getting feedback on, so that you can actually run a higher quality service, or a service that's more well designed for the people and families that you're working with. And Halima has given us the example of toilet training. And so that's that regular feedback. Halima, you've been supporting with toilet training. And Julie, I can see I've cut off half of it, but I think toileting times. Yeah. Okay, so I think. So there are different ways people can actually provide that sort of support. And I'd like you to keep thinking about that, because one of the important parts about thinking about family engagement is that it does have to be tailored to the families that you have. And every family can be quite unique. But as I said before, families have a leading role in children's wellbeing and development. Now, the importance of early childhood, education and its impact on a child's life is actually supported by many years of research in developmental science. So this has actually been studied and researched. We know now from the research that we have that family engagement during the earliest years of children's life is one of the most powerful predictors of a child's healthy development. So families are children's first teachers, and it's the quality of the parent and child relationships and the interactions that create that foundation for the skills that children need to be successful in school and life. And so family engagement in early education is particularly important for children in low-income families, because it actually helps create consistency between the home and the care environments. You can be an important role model for families in supporting them to really embrace parenthood and understand some of the important information that they start to see how important early childhood is, and they take quite seriously what is happening for their children in their day-to-day interactions. And the positive outcome of engaged parents is a powerful increased support for children's learning at home. So they start to learn more at home. Parents feel empowered, so they feel more confident about what they're doing, and it improves family well-being. And the research is showing that children see benefits like improved cognitive development. So that's the mental development. They also have improved academic performance, better social and emotional development, and their health is improved. Now, we as educators might say we know that, but frequently parents don't. There is no course for parents necessarily to go before you have a child. So with your role, you're able to show parents and teach parents about this in a really important way, but in engaging and talking to them about why you're doing certain things and how they help the children. There are reasons that and these are the reasons that family engagement is an essential component of a high quality service. So establishing your parents in your service allows your parents to develop some very strong bonds and strong connection to the family daycare service that they're attending. And this supports children's achievement in the long term. And when you think that 25% of you are have already provided care to over 40 families, that is a lot of support and a lot of families that are assisted and children whose development is assisted by the fact that you engaged with their families in a full sort of embracing the family engagement that we're talking about tonight. Now, sometimes the families of children we provide care and education for can actually look very different to our own. And they could be a single parent family, a multi-generational family. So it could be grandparents raising their children or grandparents, parents, aunts, there could be a multi-generational when we talk about it. It could be a gay or a lesbian family. It could be a family going through a breakup. So the family is actually under a lot of stress and breaking up through divorce or separation. It could be a family going through hard times economically. And in our current climate, we know that that is going to increase in the next few years. We're going to see more families suffering some economic hardship. It might also be a blended family. When we talk about a blended family, it's a family that a man and a woman have had children to other partners, and now they have become partners and their children are now together in one family unit. So we call that a blended family. Or it could be an adopted family, so that they have adopted children or they've adopted the parents. And we have step families, we have single parent families. Think about all the different structures of families. And we could have families that are headed by two unmarried partners, or they might household that have lots of different families living in the same house. But the important thing to remember is there is no one type of family. There is no perfect family, and there is no ideal family. Every child's family is unique. And as educators, we have to respect and celebrate the diversity of families in our care. Because regardless of what the structure of that family is, they are still capable of giving love and providing the care and support that those children need. It doesn't change with the structure of the family. It's about people. So our role in supporting families in their role is quite important. We're often the very first professionals that families start to see on a regular basis. You are often the first people that they trust outside of their immediate family. When parents first have children, it's natural for them to have doubts. It's completely natural. And for any of you who have embarked on mother or becoming a parent of a mother or father, you will know there is a whole lot of searching going on. Am I doing this right? Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? Is my child like other children? And don't get me started on how many times when you have children, other people can tell you how to do it or what you should be doing. It is a challenging role parents take on. And when their child is new and they're new to parenthood, it can be quite daunting and intimidating. It can be frightening, particularly if you have no extended family here in Australia or local to you. And so parenting today has a lot of stress and pressure. And parents should feel confident and positive in their parenting role. And we should be assisting them to understand their children better. With so much information bombarding parents from every angle, it's important that there is positive, simple, less confusing information that really makes them feel supported and makes them feel that they are doing their jobs well. As a professional, you've probably seen many children and many parents, and you're probably already aware that reassuring parents that they are doing okay is an important role, and it's probably something you do regularly. Do not presume they know they are doing okay. So don't think they will already know that. It's very reassuring for a parent of even the most loveliest child that will benefit from reassurances. And I think it's so important that we reassure parents regularly. The children you have are young children, and they need that reassurance of what they're doing is right. And as well as reassurance, there will be times that you might feel they need to be referred to additional help. And they may ask you for additional help that they need to be referred to, or you might identify it. And it's important we do this really carefully and sensitively. We need to know where in our communities there is support for things like domestic violence, for food pantries, for medical assessments, for occupational therapy. We need to research in each of our communities. So you need to take responsibility, or perhaps there's a few of you who are local to each other, take responsibility to look and say, okay, what is in my local area that I can refer parents to? If a parent comes to me and they need support, where can I send them? So that it makes it easier. You might choose to have some resources available at your home ready to show them or give to parents as part of that support, so that they can actually readily look at the brochures. It might be through just a plastic sleeve folder that they can look through and they can see what is available there. There might be an information sheet from your local council that has all those support services. Don't assume just because the family also lives in the community that they know about these services, or that they even know that there's any resources available. So do ask around and do have a look at what's available so that you can give information to families as it comes up. We are not expected to be experts in every topic, and that's really important to recognise as well. But where we are expected is to be able to refer people on, to let families know where the support is available. And of course, they're challenging conversations that you're going to have. And so engaging collaboratively and respectfully is one of the key things to be aware of. And so thinking about what are some of the ways we can engage collaboratively and respectfully with families. And I'm just letting you have some time to think about that. Just think about the last respectful engagement you had with a family, or the last time you collaborated with a family. What did you do? And think about that. I'm going to give you some ideas to go with that. Okay, so these are some of the ways we can do that. Firstly, we need to communicate with families often. So when there is good communication between educators and families, learning is collaborative, and accomplishments are acknowledged and problems are recognised. And that's important, that regular communication. It's when you go without the communication that relationships can break down. So making sure you have that daily communication when you can, you keep each other informed about what's happening with their child. And if there are some challenging behaviours happening, always remember to let them know about the good behaviours as well, the good things about their child, because nobody wants to hear all the bad stuff. They often want to hear some good things as well. So just make sure we keep a balanced approach. And of course, so that's about communicating the positive and the negative. And if parents can get a sense of their children's behaviour, both, the accomplishment and the challenging parts, they will get to see their child, the whole version of their child, not just, the parts that you wish to share. And of course, fostering that idea of two-way communication, because it's important that the educator hears from the parent what the child is doing at home. It's just as important, of course, for you to share what the child's doing with you, but often we forget and it becomes one way. We don't get the feedback back from the families. So making sure you are finding out how are they going at home, are they sleeping well, or how's the toilet training going? So keeping that sort of feedback going in a loop, a continuous loop of communication. And of course, use multiple types of communication. So there's different ways. So when you engage with a parent, you might engage with them verbally, you might speak to them at drop off or pick up. You might keep a journal for each child so that families can actually read what happened for that child during the day. And you might even have a closed Facebook group that you can actually give some feedback or send emails or text messages. So do try and use a variety of ways to communicate so that, different people communicate in different ways. And it just allows you to keep a whole system of communication happening. And of course, one of the important things about engaging collaboratively and respectfully is around understanding each family's expectations and the views about their involvement. So what parents or caregivers view as family engagement may actually differ from family to family. So for example, in some cultures, the families believe that the most respectful way to treat an educator is not to question them, not to suggest or to share information. Be very clear about the involvement that you expect and welcome from families. Just let them know what you like. Let them know if you want regular feedback. Say it's okay, I value that. It makes my job, it's important for my job. Tell them about the fact that there's a standard that here in Australia, we value that feedback from parents. And of course, honour the family's limits that they may wish to maintain. They may wish to have some limits and honour those. And finally, approach the whole relationship with respect. Treat the educator and the family relationship the way that you would an important relationship in your life. Work to create that important, that respectful and reciprocal relationship, the one in which families feel valued and supported, and so do you. And of course, when you look at all of those things, it's not easy. It is a process and it doesn't happen straight away. It's something that you build to. And as you get to know the child and the family better, it will develop. And for those of you who felt in the survey that you came into, that they thought didn't actually, maybe not knew the families as well, or they didn't know you as well, these are things that you can develop. A relationship takes time to build and needs time. And so keep working. Small steps every step of the way. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be trying. And that's really important. So let's have a look at when we first meet a parent. I'm just going to think about this. What do you do to support and reassure families whose children are using an education and care service for the first time? Think about, what are you doing to get information that will help you manage any separation anxiety that child may have from their primary caregiver? What strategies do you have in place for information sharing between families and the service during orientation and during settling in and onwards? Have you thought about that? Or is this completely new to you? This is the important thing to consider. Sorry, I'm just about to choke. So it's important to consider when you meet that family. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to actually jot down some ideas, and I'm just going to take a drink of water. And I'm back again. So, ideas. Love to hear from you. I hear that Fatma tells her family how they're going to work together. And I can see that Leanne, she actually invites families to join her for several visits before they commence care. And that's an important thing, isn't it, Leanne? I can see that that is one way, the relationship, to leave your child with somebody, you need to start to feel comfortable. Who is this person? And so giving them some time to have some mini visits to get to see how it works is not just important for the parent, but it's also important for the child. It also gives you a little bit of an introduction. I can see that Rayleigh does, she suggests them to stay and play in the beginning and starting to play with care. So there's a number of you that allow that time to actually get to know the service before they're finally left by themselves. And an orientation day is also held by Maria. So there's a few orientation days happening as well. So if you're reading, if you're looking and thinking, where is Robyn getting all this information? I'm getting it from yourselves. And you can see it in the chat. People are putting up their ideas. Short stays, orientation days. Okay, so, and as Shane, that idea of an unhurried sociable visit for a first meeting to chat and look around the place, really valuable. If you can spare the time to have that unhurried sociable visit, I mean, remember, parents are leaving their most precious asset with you, and they'd like to get to know you. And it's really lovely for you because you get to see how that relationship's developing. In our last PD in your pocket topic, we actually looked at a lot of these things. And so if you didn't see it, you might like to go online and catch up. But I mean, but they're important questions to ask. And knowing with the questions that I asked you about how you support families and what strategies are in place, knowing about those things, because when it comes to the National Quality Standard, you want to know that you've covered these areas. And the question I would ask is how many of you actually ask the family if there's a special topic that they'd like to see incorporated in the curriculum. Maybe you identify that there's particular interests the children have. And if you get to know that before children arrive, you can make sure some of those interests are around, ready for that child. So you've immediately got a captive audience. And remember, of course, and I think someone's having a Christmas party, inviting all the families to come and enjoy it together, and sending the photos of the child settled into care. I think it's funny because these sorts of activities that you're all identifying, they're part of family engagement. And it's important that right from the beginning, we engage with families. First impressions really do matter. And so the time and the patience you put into those first impressions, into those orientations, into those scheduled unhurried visits, will actually build that relationship a lot faster than you would do if you just went ahead without any of that orientation. So it's the important foundation. It's laying a really good foundation for a great relationship. And Pam has reminded us that parents stay with children and leave when they're confident and comfortable. And that's, and I say it all comes down to confidence and comfort. And and I always remember that there is regardless of whether we think it's right or not, there's always a little bit of parental guilt attached to leaving your child with somebody else. And we need to acknowledge that. And, you might even share your own experiences with parents about that. So let's go to getting to know that family. Let's move on. We're starting the family. Let's get to getting to know our families. And that's an important part. So getting to know your families, I'm going to ask a few thought-provoking questions for you. And once again, let me go through the questions, and then you might like to, if something hits you, please feel free to put it in the chat, because it's one way people can also pick up on that discussion. When we've got, 600 people online, it's hard to have an open discussion, but we can always type in if we want to. So some of the thought-provoking questions I'd like to share with you about getting to know your family. How do you establish and maintain meaningful partnerships with all families? And the important thing is there is all families. It's really important to recognize, once again, as I said before, that family structure, but sometimes we develop those relationships with some families, but have a look, what strategy will you do to ensure that each family feels included? And how can our family daycare service be more accessible to families? Is there ways that you've thought about that need to make it more accessible? And of course, communication of your philosophy and your educational choices, why you do what you do with families. How are you communicating that? How is that philosophy communicated? And many of you might be sharing that at orientation, but then how do you actually keep reminding parents about that philosophy? What are you doing when you're in your conversations? We can have really important conversations with families where we weave that information in that brings it to life. It might be woven in through the journals you keep for children or the communication books. So what strategies are in place for you for information sharing between families? So we've talked about orientation, settling in and onwards. Have you got those strategies in place? Or has tonight made you think, oh, I need to look at that? Okay, and remember, we talked about multiple strategies, not just one, but a number of strategies need to be implemented. And how do we know that the strategies we're using are right for that particular child and the family and their ability to do that? Is verbal better for you than the written? Those sorts of things to consider, how we actually know what we're doing. And I see that Rosalind, she does this through kept me each day through a communication and through verbal communication. And I see Saja has 5 minutes of communicating professionally when they pick their child up to get the parents more engaged in the service with her. I love the fact that Vesha is actually using Auslan with children. Now, Auslan is sign language. If anyone is wondering what Auslan is, it's Australian sign language. And she is using Auslan with children, and parents are interested in learning the same signs so they understand and communicate at home. It's great. It's great to hear, Shane. It's sounds really interesting and engaging. And I can also see that planning a regular meeting with parents in the month and teaching the philosophy. Okay, and that reassurance is really important, Zainab, about the group work with parents, sending the pictures of the children who is in care and allowing the parents to call or send text messages at any time, reassuring them that that's possible. Don't forget to set some limits if you have to, because the text messages and the calls mustn't take away from your time with the children. That's really important to also recognize. So letting parents know, like you might not respond straight away to a text message because you'll be caring for the children and your first priority is them. I like to hear what Lorraine's written about taking an interest in the family's culture and incorporating it into your program and everyday practice. And it might not be the cultural background you are from, but learning about that culture and incorporating it in, it actually builds that sense of inclusion, and everyone is learning. Children are learning about each other's cultures, and we all have a culture. We may not have something. Sometimes you might think, oh, what's my culture? But we all have a culture, and learning about traditions and things that are special to that family and how they believe, what they believe about different things is a really important part of understanding the cultural background of the family. Great to see everyone interacting so well. So who's part of the family? Who is part of the family? And it's important for the first step when parents come to you with their enrolment forms and in those early conversations, who do you consider to be part of your child's family? Because we may, you might think it's a mother and a father, but families, once again, so unique. So they may have aunties or grandparents or family friends that support raising the child. So recognize and identify that for that parent, you would say, who do you consider to be part of Indra's family? If it's a child of Indra, or who is important in your child's life and contributes to their upbringing, is contributing to their well-being, because that child may not have a family member that's right there living with them, and they might be overseas or they might be somewhere else, but they are part of the family. And knowing what the names are of those family members and that, the nicknames, so, if it's nanny or Oma or, whatever terms they use, so that you can start to understand. It's a little bit like making a map, a map of who that child is and how you identify, who is important. So have a think. Has every one of the children that come into your service, have you done a little bit of a mapping exercise to know who is in that child's family, what they're called, what the child refers to them as, and what their relationship is to their child and to the parents? Because that's a really important part about understanding who that child is and who you're going to be engaging with. And drop off and pick up times are really important as well. And I'm seeing so many things coming through from you all, so thank you for that feedback. That drop-off and pickups are the times that we really have the most to do with families in family daycare. So how do we make those times valued times, as unrushed as possible? And when you are actually inviting families into your home, and is your home welcoming to them? Do you allow the family member coming from their working daytime to sort of decompress and to relax before we ask them, things or tell them things they need to do? Do we let them sit and watch their children playing, or do they feel obligated to sort of pick up their child and leave straight away? What do you do to make this time valuable? Because once again, you've gotten to know this family, you've gotten to know you've mapped who's in the family. What are you doing to sort of make sure that that really critical drop off and pick up time is valuable? And I think I can see some people coming on in. And Janelle's saying about they have a family tree with family photos and names at the end of it. And of course, that idea from Karen of the closed Facebook page is something that New South Wales Family Daycare has sort of mentioned as well. Yeah, inviting families to see areas where the children are playing is a really great way for families to sometimes see their children in that informal space before their child sees them, because it tells them a lot. It's a reassuring thing to know your child, when you're not there, is happy and playing and settled. And that's an important building sort of confidence for that family that they've made the right decision in choosing your service. And Pam said that some parents bring other siblings in with them, and that's also, of course, for the siblings are part of that family unit. And of course, the communication. The communication strategies we use, and I've already touched upon some of these, but they need to be specific or diverse. And you've all, in the ideas that you've put forward, how can you make sure that your families actually like that communication strategy? Definitely a question, and it's a good time of year to ask it to say, I'm thinking about planning for next year. What are the communication strategies, that I'm using? These are the ways I communicate with you. Is there a better way to communicate with you? Just asking directly, is there a better way to communicate with you? Would you like something different? And having that discussion. Those drop-off pickup times might be the very time that you have it, or when, for those of you who do have regular catch-up meetings with parents, that might be the other time. Don't hesitate to ask and say, I want to communicate. I want us to communicate the best way we can for the in the best interest of your child. So let's make sure we keep in touch about what's easiest, what works for you, and then try and accommodate it. The idea of family diversity is, once again, and when we've spoken about looking at that family diversity, when you're mapping out that tree, your concept of family, does it reflect that diversity of family structures in the wider community? And is there a way you can approach and support relationships with all families, so that all of the families using your service actually can get to know each other, and also understand that the benefits of inclusion of different types of family structures, and how we can engage in genuine partnerships with families is really important. Genuine partnerships that challenge and address some of those stereotypical behavior where we stereotype, or we might have a bias. Some of our bias might be, our religious beliefs or how we were brought up, and we might not feel comfortable with another type of family structure. But here in Australia, it's something we have to appreciate, that we have a lot of diverse families, and we need to welcome them and ensure that we are actually making sure they feel welcomed and included. Because a child values itself by how its family is valued. And so we need to value family, and in whatever form it comes. The respect for diversity is actually part of the early years learning framework, and it tells us that positive family engagement requires that providers, that's you, family daycare educators, that it requires them to be culturally and linguistically responsive to the families they care for. And that's the culturally, we respond to their culture, we respond to their language, so we support how they communicate, and obviously, and the structure of their family. So the respect for family diversity is very important. And as I say, it can be challenging because it can sometimes challenge our own beliefs. But that's the important part of us as educators, getting to know ourselves and getting to come to terms with how we best can incorporate that sort of inclusion in our services. And that really does come down to what we refer to as shared decision making, and sharing decision making with families. Now, remember, families are the most influential educators of children. They are their first educators, and they will always remain and have a prominent influence. So sharing decision making is really important. So think about, what are the decisions that you can make together with families? And how does the information that families provide to you contribute to how you make decisions about how your service operates? So what do you gather from them? And how do we encourage our actual families to contribute to their children's experiences in ways that are meaningful to them? And of course, we need to ask, why is shared decision-making important? And it is important because families are important to children. Okay, and when we include them, when we include families in the decisions in our services, they feel empowered, and it gives us a holistic support for the child. And it's always about maintaining those collaborative partnerships. So let's think about the shared decision making. And what decisions you actually are currently making with families, or what you might want to do in the future about what decisions and what decision making you engage your families with. So Sarah is actually sharing excursions. So I'm assuming, Sarah, and you might want to add to this, you talk about what excursions you might be taking on. And so I'm really keen to see what shared decision making. Please feel free to add it on to this list. And thank you, Jackie, that you're loving the Zoom tonight. Carolyn's mentioned to us, and a really timely reminder is always refer to parents by their names and learn the names of all the family members. And yet that is, our names are such powerful things to us, aren't they? They really are. When you hear your name, it does sort of change. When someone engages with you by calling you by name, you suddenly feel more attentive. I think it's some sort of powerful, deep instinct within us. But Maria, thank you for sharing. Maria shares toilet training with them, with her family. She shared decision making around toilet training, sleeping routines, and obviously, Maria, you're a fan of this, and working together, you seem to be getting better results. I love, Carolyn, your idea about having a planner that parents add family events to. That's great. It encourages that conversation and sharing and talking to the children. Ashana is eating habits, routine, sleep patterns, toilet training. A lot of you have got those same things, sleep routines and changes, likes and dislikes. Yeah, you guys have got it. Have a look at this. If you're wondering about what the answers to these questions are, look at what's being shared. Sharing the food menu, looking at the routines together, and children's health and lunches and food, behaviours and mannings. I see, Andrew, you set some common goals for the children, and that's a really great way of shared decision making, because it actually means that the parents have got a goal, you've got a goal, and if you're working together on toilet training or you're working together on particular routines, it's a team approach, and that makes your job so richly rewarding, because you're not just managing and working with children, you're actually working with developing these really strong, powerful family bonds for children and families. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And an afternoon tea for Mother's and Father's Day, fabulous. Yeah. And of course, you can have an afternoon tea just for me. There might be people in people's lives that, are really important. There might just be an afternoon tea for someone who's important in that child's life. The child might want to choose who they bring, because, all of the different family structures are so important. And I can see, Penny, like a few of you, you get families to contribute ideas for environment setups and activity ideas. Really great. And this, of course, might be quite challenging for parents who are not used to this, particularly if you come from a background and where, educators are always just make all the decisions and nobody gets to feed in. So for parents, this is something they need to get used to, but it's as an important education for parents, because it actually helps them develop skills in being an advocate for their child. And that's really important as well, because there's going to be many years ahead for them when, you're, as a parent, you have to, or a family member, you have to advocate for that child. And so it's a really important role, not just, around the things we immediately think of, but it's about that long-term skill development for our families. So shared decision making, hopefully that's given you a lot of ideas. And of course, supporting families to participate. I mean, those ideas are all around supporting families to participate, creating those opportunities for families to engage. And we've already seen them. You've given examples about, birthdays, family events are recorded. You've got them. When you are doing that shared decision making, you're actually creating those opportunities for engagement. And as I say, it is creating an opportunity for parents to learn to be their child's advocate. And other ways you can actually have opportunities to engage are family surveys. And of course, sometimes a family survey is hard if you're not great with written English, or the families aren't. So it might be other ways, and inviting your family members with special skills to demonstrate them to the children. Or there might be somebody in the child's extended family that has got a particular interest, or have been to a holiday or a trip somewhere, and the child's very excited about it. You might want to invite that person to come and share that same idea with the other children, because of that conversation and talking point. And of course, you know, this really beautiful part about those opportunities to engage and that shared decision making. How often do you ask families, what are their hopes and their dreams for their child? And, you know, have they got hopes and dreams? Have they actually thought about that? You know, particularly if you think about, you know, particularly if you've got many children, you know, you might have hopes and dreams for the first, but by the time you get to the third, you're just exhausted. Your hope and dream is that they'll sleep tonight. But for us to be able to give that time for parents or the caregivers in that child's life to reflect on what are the hopes and dreams for your child. And I just love that expression, hopes and dreams, because when you know what the hopes and dreams are for their child, you can help them with that. And you can also help sometimes guide them with regard to some other hopes and dreams that they might not have even considered as possible. And being able to shine the spotlight on what you see as that child's unique strengths and talents, so that they can see there are other hopes and dreams they might have. So can you think of other ways to create opportunities for families to engage? And I must say, you've already come up with an awful lot of ideas. So anyone reading the chat will see, you know, we've seen that parents come in and done pumpkin cutting, and yeah, and I love the fact, Coquille, parents do share their goals for their child, which helps you plan your experiences. So you're linking the parents' goals through that shared decision making into what the experiences are you are doing. And that's a really great way to sort of develop that. So say if you're lucky enough to be able to see the chat, you can just click on the chat button at the top. You'll be seeing these wonderful ideas coming through for us. And so, you know, family contributions, okay? I wonder how much your families do contribute. Perhaps they are actually contributing, you know, as you can see in this picture, they're contributing the old bottles, you know, for some craft activity you might want to do. But, you know, there are other options that many of you have mentioned in the chat about food and, I mean, recipes and ideas for, you know, of cultural background that you might like to share. So, you know, recognizing that family contributions can come in all different ways, and there isn't any sort of set one way to do it. Certainly, often you have families that can put their hands up to go on excursions, which is great to help you with excursions. But some parents, based on their work, may not ever be able to do that. So being able to make sure that they still feel that they've got another way to contribute. If they can't do, you know, if they can't attend an excursion, or if they can't be somewhere, they can do something differently, and without putting too much stress on the parent. So you might want to talk about the different ways people can contribute, give them some ideas of different ways they might like to contribute, but also appreciate that they may not be able to make the contribution, you know, at this point in time. Once again, we're still reflecting and respecting the diversity of families and the diversity of the challenges that they have. Someone has actually asked me, is it enough to know who live with them, who lives with the child? Yeah, no, it's enough to know who lives with the child when you're sort of recognizing contributions and thinking about family diversity. But I do think it would be great to consider, you know, are there people in the child's life who might not live with them, but are very special to them? They might have a name that the child refers to, because it allows that conversation to develop. So I just wanted to just come back to that, because it's a great question by Alina, about, well, you know, is it enough to know just who live with them? But if we think about the people that are special in our lives, and potentially if you've got a family in your family lives, sometimes they don't live with us, but we might FaceTime with them regularly, or we might Zoom with them, particularly with modern technology. So they're very present in children's lives, but they just might not be there, you know, living in the house. And so I think just to keep that in the back of your mind all the time. so that you're aware of it. So let's have a look at providing that information. You know, how are you providing the information currently about your service? That's something to be aware of. And I love these particular, information about the service because, people have said how they send photos to families during the day. They put the communication books near the sign-in sheets. You might email or message updates, having those conversations, the parent educator meetings, child portfolios or news boards. And I can see from the chats that I can see people have added those ideas in all the time about those sorts of things. And you might be doing some of those, you might not be doing all of them, but it's important for you to identify what works for your service for getting that information out there. Are there communication methods you should be using? And of course, as I mentioned earlier, it's about asking parents as well, what is the communication that they would prefer? And if there is, a particular communication, it's important that we sort of identify it and use it if it's working. And I think, if I'm just looking at some of the ways that you are sharing the information about the service, we've got people doing a lot of talking, and so we've got a lot of people who use portfolios and communication. I wonder how many of you are using newsletter. I'm just going to go to the other chat section because I can see we've got, Andrew's got Facebook, daily reflections, daily verbal communication. Facebook, I can see a lot of you are using Facebook. And Kinderloop. Sarah, you're using probably a software program, I'm assuming, that's Kinderloop. And yes, some people are using Story Park Reflections and Harmony Portal. So there is some technology you're using to communicate. And communication books are great. Bearing in mind with technology, always, that's another way of understanding your families, is making sure, is your family, the families you're working with, or all of them, are they sort of able to manage technology? So they may not be able to. So making sure we're considerate of the different ways people can communicate. And for some of you, you might find verbally, particularly if written language is not their strong point and they're not great at reading, sometimes verbally it has to be done. And don't forget about the power of, photos, because it can sometimes help support. If English is not your first language, it can help you to understand and put context around what it is you're trying to tell them. Yeah, a lot of people using Storybook and Kinderloop. So let's look at the challenges. I like a good challenge, because not all family engagement is easy. And sometimes there are aspects of it that is a little bit more difficult. Remembering, of course, with the challenges, that it takes that village to raise a child. I love that African proverb. It's always been a favourite of mine. And so the resources and support is one of the challenges we face. How we get that information together and get people talking. And we've covered that about, look at your local government at those spaces that you can actually get to. But when it comes down to it, not all family engagement is easy. And sometimes there are aspects of family engagement that's challenging. There are some families that we may not always get along with, and their world and our worlds may be very different. We might have very different values. And sometimes we have to have challenging conversations. I call them tricky conversations. And we have to tell sometimes families things they may not want to hear. And we need to be managing that family engagement so that when there are difficult conversations to be had, we're able to actually show some empathy and some understanding, but still maintain our professionalism, because it's important to recognize you are a professional. A family daycare educator is a professional person. So you are running a professional business. And sometimes those conversations, such as, I'm thinking when you've got to tell them things such as, it can be anything, telling them that you're going away, to telling them that that their child has hurt another child, or the person comes to you, a family member comes to you and very angry, accusing you of something. I mean, they're all conversations that can be quite challenging. If a child gets injured in your care, or if, the conversation you have to have and the questions that will be asked about it, how you manage it is a really important part of that family dynamic and that engagement. In fact, how you manage those conversations will often depend whether or not the relationship continues with that particular family. So there is an organisation that actually supports educators to promote and protect their positive mental health in children, and it's called BU. Okay, and it's an organisation. You'll be able to Google it to find out more information, but they suggest that you use this technique of stop, reflect and act to process those difficult conversations. So imagine this parent comes into you and starts getting very angry, or starts to get upset. And it's really where you have to stop at that point. Make sure you don't just launch into immediately talking back. Let the person talk. Even if they're accusing you of things are not right, let them download and talk to you. And take the time to listen to what they're saying, and to try and see what it is, that really is bothering them. Because if we cut them off or don't let them finish, or we attack back, then we are just in an argument then. So take the time that you as the professional are going to stop and listen to what they're saying. Nod your head to understand that you're actually listening to them. If you need to make a comment, you might say, I can hear you, I'm listening to you, go on. Give them their space. And consider your thoughts then is the reflection part. So consider your thoughts and feelings and the safety, emotional safety of those around you. And before you act, okay, even if it means that you have to say to a parent, okay, I've heard this. This is the problem I hear that you're saying. Let me look into it, or let me investigate it and get the information for you. Okay, it will depend on what the issue is the parent's raising with you, but you can always say, okay, I've heard what the problem is. I will get some information to show you what it is that we've done or what has happened. Take that time, slow yourself down. That's really important. Step back a little bit from the situation and just slow yourself down. Because if you recall what I said, parents are highly emotive because this is part of their heart. Outside, walking around, that is their child. And so they can be far more ferocious and their reactions be quite harsh to things. So we need to take the professional approach to stop, listen to them, and then try and listen to what's being said, and don't rush into giving answers all the time. And when it says act, when we say stop, reflect and act, acting means you don't need to completely solve an issue. You don't need to have the answers. When you act, it means you're preparing for the next step. So with a difficult conversation, it's about taking that time and stepping back and saying, I will look into this. I will investigate this. Don't be bullied into reacting straight away to a reaction. But difficult conversations actually can sometimes build a relationship, because when they're treated with respect, when a situation has happened that's of concern, if people are treated with respect, if people are advised of what the issue is, particularly if there's something has happened at the service, it's important that you tell that parent what has happened before they hear it from someone else. And that's important. We try not to hide anything that's happened. We try and say, okay, this has been a mistake, or this accident has happened to the child, but we will tell the parent about it in just simple facts and try and approach it in that way. It is better to be open and transparent in what you're communicating, so that the difficult conversation, it's like putting the topic on the table and allowing people to express their feelings and finding and working towards a solution together. So how to start a difficult conversation? So when you do need to raise issues of concern with a family member, it can be very hard for you, and it can certainly be hard for the family. And especially if you have to have conversations with a family when you suspect that their child has behavioural issues or some other issues. And so don't do this alone. Always, when you've got to have a difficult conversation, talk to your coordinator, your family daycare coordinator from your service before you approach the family, okay? Because there is an ability, that is what your family daycare coordinator is there to do, to support you. So before you have those difficult conversations, talk to the coordinator. Your coordinator will be able to support you to look at, well, what's the best way to approach this situation? They will generally know a little bit more about the parent than I can tell you in a workshop. And so they will be able to help you, and even sometimes rehearse with you, go through what you're going to say to help the conversation. They may even come with you to have that conversation, but you don't have to do it alone. So always discuss a difficult situation with your coordinator, and try and, if possible, have them present when you meet the family. And to make it easier, when you do have to have a difficult conversation about a child, you really need to make sure you've done some observations. Okay, so focus only on what you actually see and you hear. Just what you see and hear, rather than what you think. Okay, just write down what you see and what you hear about a child's behavior or their emotions or their thoughts, or if they have whatever difficulties they're having. Just focus on what you see and what you hear. And take note of when it happens, where that child is when it happens, and how often it's happening, when that behavior that's of concern is starting. Because that information is really valuable in trying to see patterns. So, keep this going for a week or two, or, however long you need to. And notice what makes that child's experience or their behavior worse. We call that triggers. What starts it, or what makes it, create a more difficult situation. So it does mean that when you have starting to see a behavioral issue or some issue with a child, it's really important to start to write down that information, to start collect that information. It will help you and your coordinator to work better together, work collaboratively, to actually be able to solve the issue. Because who knows, when you've got that information between you and the coordinator, you may be able to already work out what the solution is. It may not require a difficult conversation. It may require just an adjustment. But that idea of taking time to do the observations, really important. And of course, use really factual examples, because parents want to know. So those observations can be very helpful when you're talking to parents. And some families are going to welcome the concerns you raise. They're going to see, they might think that's really helpful and thank you for finding that out or looking at that. Others may actually respond with anger, disbelief. They may feel it's some sort of a personal attack on them. And that's why having your coordinator with you is so important, because you can actually look at the best way to approach it with the parents. You know who the parent is. You'll be able to help frame that conversation to make sure it's as clear as possible. And always finish any difficult conversation with reassuring the parent that you are there to work with them and that you have their child's best interests at heart, because that's really important. They need to know that about their child. So imagine you have families with requests or concerns. Think about, what are you doing at the moment to respond to people's requests or concerns? And it's hard to not react emotionally at times when you're criticized or there's a complaint made, because we're human beings, we have hearts, and all of us are trying our very best. So when you receive criticism, it's natural that you can feel quite hurt about it, or you can feel that you don't want to do the job anymore, or that you don't like the family. They're natural reactions. But this is where we remember we are professionals, okay? There will be complaints. Everybody gets a complaint against them at some stage. There will be people who express concerns. That's normal. I've been working in children's services for over 30 years, and I can tell you there's been times people have made complaints, okay, against me or against one of my team, and I appreciate that. At least they're telling me. I'd rather people tell you that there's a concern or a complaint than not tell me. Okay, because you can fix it, or you can address it, you can talk about it if people tell you. So always, whenever you receive any concern, use that stop, reflect and act method. But stop, and maybe one of the first things you could say is, thank you. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Thank you for raising this with me so we can solve it together. Okay, and that often diffuses the situation when you say thank you for that. And of course, take on the issues that families raise, and look at them and reflect on them, because sometimes issues that are being raised can make the service better, or they can give you a different perspective. And that's a really important part of addressing concerns. And with concerns or complaints, talk about them with your coordinator. Once again, take them to your coordinator, talk to them, reflect. Don't take them and think, if I tell my coordinator, they'll think I'm doing a bad job. Coordinators, once again, are humans too. We're all on a quest to do better. So use these times when we receive complaints or concerns as times for us to grow. It doesn't necessarily mean what the parent is seeing is real. I remember a parent complaining to me that the only thing I served once was carrot sticks, and the children didn't eat carrot sticks. And I couldn't understand why she thought I was only serving carrot sticks, until I realized that when she arrived each afternoon, the only thing left on the tray of afternoon tea, which was a beautiful big banquet of lovely things, was the carrot sticks. Okay, but that was her perception. And we all have perceptions that we see from one particular angle. And so just because they're seeing this doesn't mean it's correct. It means that there's sometimes we have to talk about the different perspectives. Okay, there's many ways to see a concern or a complaint. Now, don't forget, in every relationship we engage in, we have to set limits. Okay, that's really important. We all have boundaries that we draw around ourselves to define who we are as individuals. So how strong that boundary we have around us depends upon our relationship with each person that we're in the relationship with, and the context of that relationship. I'd like you to think about the different boundaries you set with your parents, as opposed to a partner or someone in your family. Does the person, who sells you groceries in the store know as much about you as your sister, or perhaps? No. So that's do you know so much about them? Boundaries are those invisible lines that we kind of establish. They're about privacy, and they're about what you are comfortable to say about yourself. And that's really important, that what are you comfortable revealing about yourself, and what are the professional boundaries you have with these people, with these families. So whilst we talked before about sharing about yourself, be aware you don't have to share everything. Professional boundaries are the limits that you set. And be aware that sometimes when we cross those professional boundaries, when we reveal too much about our personal life, say we're having trouble with our marriage, or we're having a fight with somebody, when we start to tell people who are actually the families about the problems in our life, we can sometimes erode or destroy those professional boundaries of us as an educator and them as the family member who is using our service. So if you cross boundaries, it can be very unprofessional. So educators need to be sort of thoughtful about how much information do I give? So yes, they might know your family, but and they might know what your children are doing, but they don't know, if your children are badly behaved, they don't necessarily need to know that. Think about privacy, not just your privacy, but the privacy of your family members as well. So if we're too distant with a family, we can't be great educators, but we also can't be great educators if we get too involved with a family. And of course, it's natural you're going to grow closer to a family over time, but you are the one that needs to decide what the lines are. And remember that this is your profession, and that as an educator, you are a professional. And a useful question to ask yourself when thinking about your professional boundaries is, what am I doing or about to do? Is it in the best interest of the child or the children and their family? If the answer is no, you might be crossing a professional boundary. So if it's not in the best interest of the child to know or the family to know, then you definitely are crossing a professional boundary. But it's also, is it in the best interest of my family to know this information? It's a real challenge. And I think it's a conversation that you need to have about professional boundaries. It might be one that your team might want to have as a discussion, with other family daycare educators or with your coordinator, to understand that concept of professional boundaries, because it's really, it's one of those things that can drain us if we share too much of our life, and how to get that balance right so that people get to know the person we are. They get to know our likes and our interests and our hobbies, perhaps. They get to know, who our family members are. But naturally, there might be things you don't want to know. You might have a hobby that none of us want to know about, okay? And that's okay. If you have a hobby that you don't want to share, that's not a problem. But it's those sorts of things, deciding this is how much information I want them to know. This is what I don't want them to know. Now, as at any time you have fun, end of the night, what do you do? We've got a video, okay? But we're going to watch this video now, and we're going to then have the opportunity to have some questions and some discussion time before we finish.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning. I would like to introduce Associate Professor in Early Childhood Education and Care from the University of Sydney, Marianne Fenech. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's a pleasure.
I'd like to just start by asking you a few questions, if that's okay, and if you would like to jump in and just tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing. But firstly, I would like to ask the question because I understand that you've conducted some research on family engagement in education and care services and how families like to engage. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about your research, please?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So it's, I actually have a social work background. I'm not an early childhood teacher. And I think as a social worker, I worked with families in low income areas. So and it was interesting because I came into early childhood by doing a PhD on the regulations.
Wow.
Some of you will be thinking, oh my gosh, couldn't even be worse. But I loved it. And I just fell in love with early childhood education. But one of the things, I guess, that I brought from my previous social work career into early childhood was how important connections with families are. So it's I've got a real heart for it. So a few years ago with colleagues from Macquarie University, we did a national survey and we investigated why both current users of early childhood and prospective users, so families who were thinking about using early childhood, what was influencing their decision making.
Wow.
So we
Okay, what did you find from that research?
Yeah, look, we found it was interesting. Both groups, both the current users and the prospective users, I guess no surprise, wanted, basically, they first and foremost, they wanted to see their child happy and safe. That was unanimous across the board. And I think when we think about what do parents want from a service, there's two ways to think about it: what they want for themselves, but what they want for their child, and then I guess as a family as a whole. So from the child perspective, it was very much that safety, that they want to feel like when they walk away and leave their child at the door, that their child is going to be loved as they love their child, that their child's going to be safe. And then, of course, from that base, then came the, well, we actually know we want, particularly for the older children, the 3 to 5s, it came out that, well, we want children to learn, we want them to socialize with other children and understand, learn how to share, and we want them to be ready for school. So that's the more cognitive, social, physical development side of things came after that. And then, of course, for the family themselves, sorry, I've got a plane going over here.
That's okay.
I live in the inner west of Sydney, so it's a bit of a hazard.
No problem at all.
Yeah, but from the family perspective, of course, they're looking for a service that's going to fit in with their family, that's flexible enough to meet their needs, that meets the hours, that suits, and I think they want to feel that they are using a service that they connect with, so that with the educators and the family, there's consistency in values and beliefs.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that's where family daycare really comes into its own, with building those positive relationships and the smaller group environment. And we feel typically that that's what families want, is that they can walk away. So it's interesting and fantastic to see that the research supports what family daycare educators are doing.
Well, definitely, Chris. And more recently, I'm currently involved in a project. The project is being led by colleagues from the University of New South Wales, and also involves colleagues from Western Sydney and Griffith. But we're looking at engaging families on low incomes, and family daycare is a critical piece of that research. And we're finding it's so interesting. The families are telling us the flexibility, the connections is absolutely critical. So educators listening to this, you are doing an amazing job.
Thank you. And we feel the same. We feel very fortunate to, have the privilege of taking care of these children and providing that high quality education and care for the families.
Yeah.
So the second question that I'd like to ask you is, do you generally feel that engagement is undertaken well in family daycare in terms of relationships?
Yeah, look, from what I've gleaned, the ASEQA data tells us that generally engaging with family in quality area 6 is the area of practice that educators across the board do best. Out of all of the 7 quality areas, that's the one educators are doing well. So a third of all services are exceeding and 2/3 are meeting. I think there's something unique though with family daycare, and what I've seen is, the starting point is that educators are letting families into their own home. And I think there's something about educators where there's a genuine sense of welcoming, hospitality, inclusiveness. So I think family daycare educators do that really, really well. And, the families are telling us that they become a part of the educator's life, and the educator becomes part of their life. So, and that happens even when the child leaves the service. So that real connection, I think that's testament to how well educators in family daycare are engaging families. I think, Chris, though, we need to think, when we ask that question, we need to think about, what are we talking about when we use the word engaging families? What does it mean to engage? And the way we think about it in our research is that when you engage a family, it's building that initial connection and working relationship, but then it's also maintaining that relationship over time. It could be a few months, but it could be a few years. So I think as with any relationship, you can get a bit sort of blasé and, you know, just get into the routine of things. But I think it's really important to continually be thinking about how well is this engagement going? What's going well and what could be better? And we know that work can be quite emotionally taxing. So, you know, it's a lot of energy to be focused on families and to give of yourself. But and that's where I think the coordination and the support from the broader family day service is so critical.
Absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out. I think, you know, the educators do work really hard at, you know, creating that sense of belonging from the moment that families walk in, and that's where engagement starts. And hopefully it's, you know, a long relationship, a building process. And we know of many educators that continue to engage with families well after they have finished care. So that's really refreshing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, Chris. We've heard families tell us, you know, either they didn't want a centre-based service, or they tried a centre-based service and it didn't work. And then when they come to family daycare, that more personalised approach, I think, does enhance that belonging that you were talking about.
Absolutely. And Marianne, could you please share with us how you feel that families are looking to engage with their education and care services, particularly with family daycare? And you've touched on a couple of points already. And also, why is family engagement so important and critical in education and care services?
Okay, so I'll start with the second bit then.
Thank you.
Look, it's absolutely critical. Engaging with families is, I think, if you can't engage with a family, the way you care and educate their child is going to be limited. We know that we need to engage with families because it's quality area 6 and we need to tick that box. But that's not why we engage with families at the end of the day. If to know the child, you need to know the family, and you need to have that shared approach to that child's learning and development, because that's when the child's really going to thrive. So I think that partnership is going to be really important. I think also when educators engage and know the family, when they they know who does the child mix with when they're at home, what does the family like to do, what's important to them, where do they go on a weekend, all of those things can feed into not just supporting the child, but extending on their learning and development, and having, you know, the EYLF talks about play-based learning, interest-based learning. Well, the family can provide a critical resource for that work. And I think in a way that by having that approach and through that engagement, then there's greater continuity for the child between the home environment and the family daycare. So it comes back to that belonging that you talked about before, you know, having that continuum rather than a real disconnect for the child is really, really critical. And we know that the child's family is their first teacher. So we would be completely mad not to engage with families and not to seek their input, share decision making, and so on. And of course, sometimes families struggle with raising a child. It's hard work. And you know, anyone in family daycare knows that it can be hard work. It's a joy, but it can be hard work, and sometimes families struggle. So I think engaging families is important, because it means that the educator can have a trusting relationship and be a support for the family, but also, if need be, that the educator can refer the family on to, you know, other families or other services, so that that family isn't struggling and isn't feeling like they're on your own. So I think for those reasons, that's why engaging families is so critical. So in terms of what families are looking for, I think the number one thing is we have to be careful about not having a formula. All families are different, and I think one of the critical things is, I guess, coming back to what we were saying at the very beginning. Treat each family as an individual and think about what is it that you want from the service, and what do you want for your child. So having those two questions. And our research is really clear, Chris, telling us that when families want to engage, they want to feel like they're accepted. They don't want to feel judged. They don't want to feel like they're a problem. They want to be able to come and be welcomed and feel like they can breathe when they come to the service. So that's really critical. Another key finding that's coming out from the current research that I'm doing is that families really value having time and that personalized approach with the educator. And I think the time, from what our families are telling us, that can be far more limited in a long daycare service where there's more children there. But in a family daycare context, we've heard beautiful conversations from families telling us, not that they're there the whole day, but they're there for a meaningful conversation with the educator to say what's going on for them, what's going on with the child. So yes, conversations can just be, how was your day? Here's what the child did today and so on. But I think when done well, it's a more extended conversation about how you're going, really how are you going? So that connection is really important. And I think the flexibility and having an individual approach. We know sometimes children with additional needs really value family daycare because educators are able to be more responsive, and the family and the child are not seen as a problem, and that's a real strength of family daycare. And the only other thing I think I mentioned before is that shared decision making. So a process of talking about, well, here's what I'm observing and what I'm thinking. What do you think? So it's working together as a team. It's really
absolutely important. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom and knowledge, and sharing the findings of your research. And I think that all of the points that you said, from the shared approach to the belonging and to valuing those relationships, I think family daycare educators do that really well, in that they do respect that families are the children's first teachers. And I think they are in a better position because of the smaller group environment to be able to base those relationships on meaningful engagement with their families, but also, they do become a support network to the families.
Absolutely.
So, children that are coming from, different backgrounds, diversity, different cultural backgrounds, and also, the additional needs, I think, that places family daycare educators in a really good position, to be able to start those relationships, and also to get to know the family and have the family daycare environment just be an extension of their home environment, which is so important.
Absolutely, it is. So there's some, I don't know whether you wanted to ask me another question, Chris. Yeah.
Just one more, but
great. Because I was going to say there's a few more things that I haven't said yet, but I'll wait till you. I think it might come in the next question. So
absolutely, thank you. Well, just finally, the only question that I would like to add, and then we will tap into your knowledge and expertise. But are there any additional ideas on how family daycare educators could engage with families to meet particular family needs? You did touch on a few of them just in the last question, but if there's anything else that you'd like to add, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, just a few things, I guess general approaches rather than, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think
absolutely
all things that I was thinking about that's come out of our research. And I've also published a book, Professional Communication for Early Childhood Educators, with Jennifer.
Fantastic.
And I know Jennifer's done some work with family daycare educators.
Okay.
And in that book, we talk about what engaging with families means, and there are 4 key things that we talk about. I've already mentioned, taking an individual approach, and I think I would just encourage educators, no matter how experienced an educator you are, always be curious about the family, and even and the child. I
love that.
Yeah, just be curious, even if they've been with you for 2 years. Still be curious, because we know children are changing and developing all the time, and families don't stay static. They change all the time too. So don't lose that curiosity. I think that's really important. This is a basic point. communication is key. So when I talk about communication, I'm not just, I guess, to reflect on as an educator, not just the words you use with families, but almost everything around that, because we know that the non-verbal communication is about 85% of a communication exchange. So,
Absolutely.
you know, when you're trying to engage families, how are you doing that? In the way you speak, in the way the environment's set up, in your physical presence, in your tone of voice. So just, you know, recheck all of those things. And we talk a lot about listening. And I think educators are in a really privileged position where sometimes they're the only person that a family feels comfortable disclosing how things really are.
Absolutely.
And that's a real responsibility. So to be able to really listen, I think, you know, to focus, to show families you're really interested in them, to encourage them to tell their story, you know, ask questions, tell me more, and to reflect back, you know, what you've heard. I think those three aspects of listening are really critical. And then the final thing I would say, Chris, is a colleague, Mark Spencer, talks about the 3 pillars of engagement. So if we think about engagement as like a house, and it needs strong foundations. There are 3 pillars or 3 strong foundations that are really key. The first one is safety, that sense of emotional safety for the family. So creating an environment where families feel comfortable coming to your home, no matter what they look like or how they speak. They're not going to be judged. You know, that you value them and what they have to say. So that safety is the first foundation. Availability, and I think educators do this extremely well. You make time for them. You communicate and talk to them and listen to them, and it's not rushed. I think that's really critical. So that availability. And then the final pillar or foundation is relevance. So when you're talking to a family, this seems like pretty basic, but you know, rather than going off on a tangent and talking about the EYLF, which I don't know that educators can do necessarily, but keep it about them and their child, keep it meaningful, keep it relevant to them. So I think those sort of little tools, you know, I think are worth always reflecting on in terms of, you know, an educator's practice with families.
100%. There's so much to unpack there that I really want to dive into, and I'm trying to remember all of it. But I really love, and I want to go back to being curious. It doesn't matter how long, you know, you have engaged with a family or a child. You know, at the end of the day, we really need to be curious all the time and never stop learning or wanting to learn about the family. So I really loved that point. And also the 3 pillars of engagement. I think they are fantastic tools. And as you said, you know, they might seem basic in their approach, but they work. And I think, you know, the 3 pillars are things that educators do really well day in, day out. And I think we need to stop and celebrate those moments with families and how we engage with families, because, you know, our jobs are busy, lives are busy, but I think we really need to stop and celebrate success.
Absolutely, Chris. I completely agree. And you know, I've done a lot of my research in centre-based services, and over the last year and a half, I've done work with family daycare, and I have just been blown away by educators' not just commitment, but their capacity to connect with families and engage them in a way that I think is critical to support that, you know, the children's learning and development. So it's just been a pleasure for me to see.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. It's really nice to get the feedback, and I know that I probably speak on behalf of many educators to feel validated within the sector, that we are being considered when, you know, engagement topics come up, definitely. And again, celebrating those successes. They're things that educators do without even, questioning it or thinking about what they're doing, but they do it so effortlessly. But I think it's important to stop and remember how important our job is. And as you said earlier in this session, that we are privileged as educators to be able to welcome these families into our homes every single day and engage with them and get to know them and, watch these children grow and develop.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us before we finish
I
this
think
interview?
I've covered everything actually, Chris, and I mean I think you've capped it off, you've summarized it beautifully as well. So I think engaging with families, I think when done well, it looks like a hidden skill. It looks like it is effortless and you don't actually need any skills to do it, but you actually do. And it's engaging families, I think I said before, it's quite emotional work, and it can be draining at times. But I think there's a level of the more expert you are, the more effortless and unskilled it seems, but it's not. And I think educators are highly skilled. Yeah,
absolutely. Are there any challenges that you think that educators would face? We've talked a lot about the positives and the privileges of engaging with families, but what has your research found with some of the challenges that educators face with engaging with families?
Yeah, I think working in isolation can sometimes be a challenge for educators, and I think sometimes there can be a danger of absorbing and taking on the issues that a particular family has. And so I think I would encourage all educators to contact, your coordinator and have contact with your local family daycare service, because when you work in isolation and when you engage in families and it's challenging and it's draining and you keep taking that on, that's not going to be good for your own well-being in the long run. So I think that working in isolation is a challenge. I think sometimes educators don't always know what to do, and they feel like they need to have all the answers. And I think this is where it's important when you're working with a family to think you're not the one-stop shop for a family. You can be the starting point and you can be the connector, as I said before, with other families or with other services. So I think it's important to think, just because you have your own business, it doesn't mean you have to work in isolation. And in fact, I think you shouldn't work in isolation.
Correct.
You should always be using your family daycare as a resource and as a support for yourself. Because I think too, sometimes families present with key challenges and it's like, I don't know what to do.
Absolutely.
And why would you know what to do when it's such a challenging, thing that the family's presenting with? So I think to get expert help and support and resource yourself. If your tank is empty, you're not going to be in a position to be able to support and engage families. So I think they're the key challenges that I have seen, and these are from educators who I think do work effectively. but I think too, this work is not, again, I think it's about, we hear a lot in the news at the moment about the status of educators and the payment and the conditions, We know that educators do complex work and it's challenging work and they're multitasking. So there are a lot of demands on educators' time and energy. And I think just to be resource yourself and don't work in isolation would be, I think, a key message that I'd like to give.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for acknowledging that. It is a very isolating job sometimes. And I think, from a coordination unit perspective, that, the relationships that we build with educators is just equally as important. So then, we can support the educator to support the family, and coming back to that shared approach. And a problem shared is a problem halved. And hopefully we can work, collectively and collaboratively with the family, with the educator. And as you articulately said, the educators don't need to have all of the answers all of the time, and that's not the expectation. So I think definitely taking care of their own well-being, we all need to check in and do that and just really reach out and have that shared approach.
Yeah, and I think sometimes too it comes back, Chris, I think, to what I was saying before. Sometimes you don't have to imagine you're the Superman and you're the savior. Sometimes just listening to a family is all they need, that they feel like they can go and get everything out. And because sometimes if a mum is struggling in a marriage, or there's domestic violence or whatever, sometimes there's no easy solution. And having someone that they trust, and feel like listens to them and might give them a hug and looks after and treasures their child, that we can't belittle how significant that is in a family's life.
Absolutely. I'd love to bottle that thought. And, families come in many different shapes and sizes, and we really need to look at the different dynamics and respect every family's different, and their needs will be different, as in children as well.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you would love to share with us?
I think that's it, other than to say you're amazing family daycare educators, and you do an amazing, incredibly worthwhile job. So thank you. That's the last thing I would like to say. Thank you. Yeah.
Lovely. And we would love to thank you, Marianne, for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, the research that you're doing. Could you just please share the name of the book again? And I will actually ask New South Wales Family Daycare Association to share that on the night of the PD in your pocket as well.
Oh, that would be wonderful. So it's Professional Communication for Early Childhood Educators.
Lovely.
And it's authored by myself and Jennifer Riborovsky.
Fantastic. I will definitely be making a purchase of that today.
Excellent.
And I encourage all services to, have a look at the research that's out there, and really just remind ourselves of the fantastic work that not only you're doing in the early childhood sector, but also the educators and working and engaging with families.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time, Marianne. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Take care.
Thank
See
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Because we are drawing to a close, and I'd just like to say that it has been wonderful to have everybody sharing their ideas and joining in as we went along with looking at family engagement. So many of you are doing really wonderful things when it comes to family engagement, and it is an important and vital role. And I think if we can leave here tonight knowing how important and vital that role is, and really reflecting now on every interaction you have as to how you're doing it, whether you can do it better, whether there are new ideas you can incorporate into that. 2023 is a brand new year. We're heading towards a new year where this is the time to start getting re-energized and excited about what the possibilities are for improving your service provision. So if you can grab yourself some popcorn, I would sit down with PD in your pocket and have a look at those videos, and knowing that on that website there are so many other access to resources that you can use, that it's a real bonus from the New South Wales Family Daycare to be able to offer this to you. Now, New South Wales Family Daycare also has, and in case you haven't known about it, they have a PD in your pocket Facebook group. So if you haven't already joined, please go ahead and join. And this is a PD in your pocket. If you'd like to make some comments tonight about tonight's workshop, things that you got inspired by, or you might have thought, I've got some really good ideas and I haven't shared them, PD in your pocket Facebook, go on and share them there, because that you can keep the conversation going. I think the best thing about family engagement is when we talk about it together. We can be inspired by each other. And this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the evening, is the last PD in your pocket session for the year. Remember that you can continue the conversation through Facebook, but also you can come back next year and hopefully there'll be more PD in your pockets running that you can be a part of. And I really appreciated all the feedback this evening from you, because it was great to see how many people came online. We had over 600 people with us, and hopefully you've taken away ideas from what I've shared and from the particular workshop, and also from your colleagues, the professionals that are coming online and sharing with us. Now, as I finish tonight, the management and staff of the New South Wales Family Daycare Association wanted me to extend to you very warm wishes for the festive season, whatever you choose to celebrate, for the public holidays that are ahead, and that you will be rested and that you will take the time to nurture yourself. You have all worked so hard this year. It is time that there are times over the coming sort of month that we'll have opportunities for just downtime. Please take them, savor it, because you can't give to others unless you are filled. And the precious time you have for yourself is something that's really important, and it will re-energize you for the new year. But we hope you stay safe, and we send you our best wishes. And on behalf of everybody at the team at New South Wales Family Daycare, have a wonderful new year, and we will see you next year in 2023. Thank you, everybody, and good night.